Okay, welcome to the budget balancing meeting of Monday, January 28th. Have a number of items in the agenda. Why don't we start first with the approval of the minutes of the December 17th meeting? We have a motion?
Second by Deb, I have a question. Just on the, I just noticed there the vote on the $7 million number, it says it was 5 in the affirmative and 3 opposed. Wasn't it 6?
6 to 3.
6.
It was 6, so that should be amended to 6 in the affirmative, 3 opposed.
Yes.
And that's on page 2, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph from the bottom.
Okay. So, we have the minutes with that amendment. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. What I'd like to do, I'd like to go a little bit out of order if I could, because Dave does have a PowerPoint presentation which he'd like to give. I'd like to try to get it done early if possible.
Yep.
Is that okay with you, Dave?
It's fine with me.
Good. All right.
Thank you.
Let's go.
So we've been asked to do an analysis of the full-time equivalents, FTEs, used in the school system. This actually has been a little bit of a chore based on the fact that we don't really have a good human resource module. So we started trying to go back in history, back to 2010. That proved to be rather difficult, so then we started looking at the state reports, which started in 2010. So this is using that to back that up. Each of you have a copy of the spreadsheet that has those reports from the state. So this actually gives a level of detail that was not in any of the reports that were shared with the town. Separates teachers by what they teach, support staff, paraprofessionals, separates general education and special education, and it does vary from the town FTE report. Basically, the town FTE report, as I discovered in my archaeological dig, only was reporting what was in the town budget and not those staff members that were funded through grants, revolving funds, and that sort of thing. This report is educational personnel. It does not include custodians, buildings and grounds, and positions like that, except for the buildings and grounds director. We did go back to FY10. FY12, if you will remember, was the lowest point of the Great Recession. And because of that, the numbers were extraordinarily low. FY10, going back 2 more years, is a more level playing field. But we'll kind of go through with what this report shows. So the other thing that this state report shows is also shows our student demographics as well. You can see that overall, since FY10, our student population is down 56 students. That's about 1.5%. There were significant changes in populations since FY10. Special education students, those with individual education plans, were up by 92%. We're up by 92 students, or 15%, and English language learners up by 185 students since 2010, and that's a 106% increase.
Okay.
Other statistics. 26% of our students are economically disadvantaged. 3.7% of students have 504 plans. 504 is a section of the American with Disabilities Act for disabilities that do not qualify for special education. So since FY10, we have increased 1.8 full-time equivalents in administration, and those 2 positions were the Director of Technology, and we did add a math coordinator, elementary math coordinator, to directly assist with bringing our elementary math scores up, which is one area of great improvement. Interesting to note that in 2009, the Director of Technology was cut and brought back, I think in 2012 or 14. So they went for about 4 years tried to do it without a Director of Technology, which really is quite impossible with the level of technology we need to use nowadays. Changes in teaching staff. General education, that's regular education, is down by 1.58 FTEs district-wide. The high school is down by 4.88 FTEs. Middle school is down by 5.20 FTEs. Special education is up by 7.12, and that directly correlates to our increase of 92 students. English language learners are up by 3.25 FTEs, but again, we've increased 185 students who need direct instruction in English language learning in that time frame.
Okay, can I ask a question?
You can.
Right. So, like that top part that says you're down 1.58, so some of the elementaries had additions, but you're showing that this particular impact at the high school and the middle school?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. One of the challenges we have with the small schools is 5 kids either way can really drive when you only have 2 classrooms.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that question.
So in other words, in blue, it says general education is down 1.58.
Yeah.
That's all schools, all
At the
districts.
same time, the high school went down by 4.8 and the middle school by 5.2. So I was just clarifying for myself and hopefully for everyone else that meant that the elementary schools had some additions, but the net overall was down 1.58.
Right, and the other places we saw increases with special ed and ELL. Okay, so instructional support staff, these are guidance counselors, adjustment counselors, librarians, and diagnostic and evaluation staff. If you have to do a individual education plan, you have to do testing in order to determine what that plan should be. Those increased district-wide by 3.2. And it's important to note in the governor's proposed changes to Chapter 70 funding, which I'm sure we'll be talking about later, he is talking about the need for guidance and psychological services, mainly because these impact mental health, drug abuse, and success in the classroom. And you can see that in his preliminary revision to the Chapter 70 law. So changes in paraprofessionals. This is our biggest area of increase, 23.8 FTE. At the Willett, 4.5. Again, that's our kindergarten. There has been a lot of students moving in with different needs, particularly in the realm of autism. Balch, no change over those 10 years. Callahan increased by 2. Cleveland increased by 11. There are, I believe, 2 sub-separate programs at the Cleveland that account for some of that. Oldham increased by 4.
Just explain what sub-separate is.
Oh, subset. Thank you. She's my jargon checker. Sub-separate is a substantially separated special ed program where those students have enough needs that they are not regularly in a regular classroom. That's how you bring out of district students back into the district.
Yeah.
So they're in one of our buildings.
They're in
Yes.
one of our buildings
Yes.
with their peers, with their neighbors, getting specialized instruction in our schools, as opposed to 70, 300,000 to be out of district and driving them there.
Yeah. And Dave, in terms of the number of personnel, whether it's here or one of the other slides, are these actually new personnel to the district, or are they just people coming off of grants that are now on the town payroll?
A little combination of both. A lot of the paras were not necessary. A lot of them we could deal with the special ed grant. And part of the problems with grants is every year they're not the same. We also don't find out what they're going to be till August. So those numbers have been fluxing back and forth, which is why you see changes.
If I can just clarify that a little bit, Dave was saying that, when it looks at the town FTE report, we definitely see both things coming off of grants and things, but this state report includes everybody, so
Okay.
these are actually new people who have been added.
Okay.
But for example, when we were talking about the Cleveland, there is a program there for students with autism. So most of our students with autism throughout the elementary schools go to the Cleveland, and we've added the aides there
Okay.
Right.
to reflect that need.
Right. So, when we're talking, and, paraprofessionals are much less expensive, about a third of what a teacher would cost. So that's something to keep in mind. Although our largest section of increased staffing is paraprofessionals, it's also one of our least expensive. And paraprofessionals are used to meet student needs, and as the needs have increased, so have the numbers of paraprofessionals. There we go. All right, so changes other staff since FY10, 2.6, and these are our therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech pathologists. We've seen an increased need in some of those services, especially in our kindergarten and first grade. Health has gone up by 1.4, but I will remind everyone that one of those people was added just last year when we opened the preschool at the Savage. And office and clerical staff is down by 5.55 full-time equivalents. So in total, since FY10, there has been a 36.04 full-time equivalent increase. But if you look and correlate those along with our English language learner services, our special education staff, and the shift to more paraprofessionals, that kind of explains those changes. So a couple things, just while I have everyone's attention, the Chapter 70 numbers. So Governor Baker has put out a budget, and with it a change to the foundation budget, and we did put the website up there as well. And in that, he has identified certain inflators for that foundation budget, specifically around economically disadvantaged English language learners. But there are caveats in the law and expectations starting not this year, but next year, and how that money is going to be spent. And of course, we have not seen the House or the Senate versions of that. So that will be interesting to watch as we go forward. And I think that might be, is that the last? One more. Wait a minute. Oh yeah. So and this is some of the language straight from the summary of the law. So how they're going to measure and what quartile you end up in is directly from the testing that we do each January. And you get certain money depending on how well the student do. So, the good news is if they are at a lower level, they need more direct service and increased time, and there's more money associated with that. But there also is a factor to reduce that money once they get to a point where they are speaking at a rate high enough. Economically disadvantaged, and I will remind everyone that we're at about 26%. Economically disadvantaged is another inflator in this new budget formula. And you can see here it describes how much that will be. I won't read the whole thing to you, but it's important to note that Norwood falls in the 6th decile out of 10. We are up there. Part of the reason why this first budget projection is so high is because of our number of ELL students, especially at the lower grade levels and lower ability levels, and are economically disadvantaged. So again, some of this is a little redundant, but again, mental health services in the form of counseling and adjustment counseling, and the governor is acknowledging the importance of teaching English language learners, and is recognizing economic disadvantage as increased costing factors that should be included in the foundation budget.
Okay, good. Any questions on Dave's presentation? Okay.
May I say something?
Sure.
Thank you, Dave. This, I know, was a challenge. It's always been a challenge to get the correct numbers for the number of teachers that we have and the number of employees that we have working within the school department. If you can think of how many people we have working part-time, how many people we have working off of grants, and how many people that we have coming in directly out of our budget, and none of this information
Whatever.
gets put together.
Yeah.
So, but thank you. I know that this was a challenge and very difficult to put together, and I appreciate that.
All right. With that, since we began at 6 o'clock, I see a number of people have come. We usually don't have anywhere close to this many people show up to a typical meeting. And we certainly can't accommodate. I assume there's a number of people in. Excuse me?
40.
Okay, all right. So with the approval of the committee, we'd like to have a recess and move to Memorial Hall, where just a little bit of time to set up, and then we'll continue the meeting.
So Bill just moved. I'll second it.
All right, motion made and seconded. All in favor, opposed,
Aye.
unanimous. Thank you. We'll go to Memorial Hall.
Field trip.
Yeah.
Field trip.
All right, welcome to the budget balancing meeting. We've reconvened in Memorial Hall. Now we have quite a number of people in the audience today, interested citizens. So with that, let's go back to the agenda and where we're at. So the last thing we talked about was a presentation that Dr. Thompson made on the FTE question that we've had. I guess no further questions on that. why don't we go directly to the review of the FY20 budget? So I turn it over to Tony and to Tom McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, do you want to lead us off?
Okay, I guess you have to be a really short person to use this. I'm trying to stand just so you can see me. So, I know most people in the audience are concerned with the override, but the first order of business that we have to address is this year's budget. So, a little while ago, I handed out to the committee a packet of 31 pages, and the first 10 or so pages relates to the fiscal 20 budget, and then the remainder relates to a couple of scenarios for our potential override. The really important good news is that the state recalculated their formula for local aid, and Norwood, there was winners and losers. Norwood was a winner to the tune of approximately $1.1 million in excess of what we thought would happen. So that's really good news. It's part of a rollout of a 6-year complete formula change. So we think it's going to be sustainable going forward. So right off the bat, jumping ahead to the override number that's out there of $7 million, we're probably more in the range of 5.9, which is obviously good news for taxpayers. But on the general manager side, just as an overview, the way that we divide money in the town is to take total expected revenue, less costs that relate to the utilities, less costs that relate to shared costs such as the retirement plan and health insurance, and then we have whatever amount is left. In this case, that number is $81,219,000. And then from that $81 million, we assign 55% to the schools and 45% to general government. And then we kind of basically ask each group to go back and try to come up with, if they have new additional revenues such as fees or anything that would produce revenue, and also what costs they could do to try to arrive to that number. So the general government side, we've been working on that for the last couple of weeks. We kind of finalized that over the weekend, and so the towns identified their cuts. So we basically are in balance for the fiscal 2020 budget. The schools on this sheet still shows that they need to either produce revenue or make cuts of $3,200,000. Maya sent me an email over the weekend saying that the school committee recently voted to use $1 million more of circuit breaker numbers. So effectively what that does is that revenue is offset directly against sped expense. So instead of a $3.2 million deficit for fiscal 2020, they're at $2.2 million. So basically, that's still the charge. School committee needs to come back. We're generally meeting about every 3 weeks, and we're hoping to get that number down, because whether we have an override vote or we don't have an override vote, we need to have a balanced budget by the end of March so that we can produce books, et cetera, for town meetings. Maya?
Thank you. I just want to understand what has changed since the first pass, because I thought that originally in the first pass we had almost $6 million to split, and then when we add the 1.1, I don't see how that gets us to the 81.2 million. is there something else that's been added other than the state money?
There was more, it wasn't just the Chapter 70 that went up. Chapter 70 went up quite a bit, UGGA went up 2.7%, and Veteran Services actually went up over $100,000. It tripled. We also, the other side of the state aid formula, the charges didn't go up. That rarely happens. They sometimes do go up later in the budget process, but usually every year, what happens is we see this big increase in state aid, and we're happy, and then we read the second page of the balance sheet, and it's like, okay, great, it went up $700,000, but the charges went up $600,000. Our charges were within $20,000 or $30,000, so that total state aid revenue picture is much larger than it normally is. Even absent the bigger than anticipated Chapter 70 number, that ended up being larger than it normally is because the charges haven't profits yet.
Okay, that's helpful. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the Chapter 70 money. As Tom said, thank you. As Tom said, the governor has made a proposal for Chapter 70 money, and he's proposing that the formula is changed for how Chapter 70 money is allocated. And Mr. McQuaid is right that Norwood came up a winner in that. I think, as Dr. Thompson mentioned, because of our high population of English language learners and our relatively high population of economically disadvantaged students. But I do want to make it clear to everyone that the House and the Senate have yet to make their recommendations, and they may have a slightly different formula. And so although the Norwood came out a winner on the governor's recommendation, it does not necessarily mean that that will continue, that's exactly what we'll see with the House and the Senate. I did spend some time this afternoon speaking with Bill Buckley, who is on Representative John Rogers' staff. He assured me that working on improvements to the Chapter 70 funding and school funding in general is John Rogers' #1 legislative priority, and he's working very hard on that. But they have not yet released legislation on that. They haven't started debate on that yet, and the House will be putting out their budget numbers in April.
Ann.
Tony, could you please go over those numbers of the increases and let us know if there's a page with that on it in this packet?
I don't know if that's in the packet.
It was very quick, and I'm sorry, I wasn't ready to write it down.
Right, I don't know if it's in the packet, but UGGA, which is unrestricted general government aid, which is part of sort of the 3 or 4 pieces of the state aid formula.
Chair, could you please pass the mic to the speaker?
The unrestricted general government aid portion did go up 2.7%. That's consistent with state revenues. We could get the specific number. It should be on the budget sheet. And then our veterans services reimbursement, we changed. I wouldn't say we changed our accounting practice. Last year, we noticed we hadn't been reporting everything to the state, so we weren't getting the full reimbursement we received. So that number went from about $60,000 to $157,000. Now, this is a 75% reimbursement, so that is money we'll be paying out, but it helps us balance our budget. That's an additional $100,000. So the total state aid picture was very positive overall. To the point about Chapter 78, the budget that the governor releases, he calls it the House 1 budget, that's always been the floor. The legislature has never removed it below that. Where Norwood is a winner is that what the governor's trying to do is fix problems with the formula, but instead of saying, okay, we're going to allocate an additional $500 million to funding and give it evenly to every different category, they're trying to solve problems one by one. We benefited this year. I don't suppose I would be willing to bet over the next 6 years as they implement the Foundation Budget Review Committee's recommendations, we probably won't see another state aid increase this big. But this year, in a sense, we did luck out that it hit the topics that, hit the areas that are beneficial to us. Dr. Thompson and I were just talking, there's going to be a year where the state decides to fully fund regional transportation. For those of you who don't know what that is, back in the 60s, as the state encouraged cities and towns to regionalize their school districts, they said they would pay 100% of the regional transportation costs. They've never actually done that. They've hovered around 60 or 70. So that year, you'll see a minimal increase to us, but school districts that have regional transportation costs, it'll be a great year for them. So they're trying to solve problems one at a time with the formula rather than just bump up every little area. So I feel confident that the number that's there is the floor. The charges could come back and increase with the Senate and the House budgets, but I don't think that will, generally that doesn't hurt us too much. There's 2 other pieces to the aid formula that we haven't talked about. Our charter school number has gone up dramatically over the last 10 years. I think even 7 years ago, that number was around $200,000, which is what comes out of our state aid for charter school students. It's now up around $950,000, but it's consistent with last year. So that's a number that every year it's one of those charges that's gone up, 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 up. So 10 years ago it was nothing, now it's close to $1 million, but it's roughly flat with last year. And it is based on the number of students that attend the charter school from Norwood. It's roughly a per pupil cost. So what we hope is that maybe we've hit saturation, we've hit that number at 50 or 60 students. We did also put in DESI's numbers, we saw a student increase. And remember, the numbers that they use and the numbers that we maintain always are slightly different. But we do see a dollar amount for every student in the school district. So an increase of, I think it was 25 or 30 students according to their number, really bumps up the aid number by about $150,000. I participated in 2 conference calls with the state on the aid formula changes, and I did speak to the Mass Municipal's Legislative Affairs Division about their thought process and where they think it's going. And generally, like any process, there are winners and losers, but we feel confident that the governor's number should be the floor. That being said, over the next 6 years, as they fully implement the Foundation Budget Review Committee's recommendations, which were recommendations the state came up with to fully fund education, I don't necessarily think we'll see another boom this big in any of those years. We just happen to be a city or town that's getting it earlier rather than later.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Mr. Chair?
And, excuse me.
It's okay, it's my middle name, so it works out.
I was close.
Just a quick question, Mr. Mizuko. So am I correct in understanding that your thought process at this point is that the governor's number is the floor, it could go higher, but it likely will not go lower? But that will be continuous for the next foreseeable future, like that is aid that we'll be getting each year, or is this a one-time deal?
No, so our big increase is probably a one-time deal.
That's
Best case
right.
scenario, it
Okay.
happens again. In the Commonwealth, you're held harmless for Chapter 70 aid, so your school aid never goes down, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily need to go up. So if you have a flat student population, it actually, your aid doesn't go up too much each year. Our numbers are roughly flat, they're up year to year, but cities and towns are held harmless in Chapter 70, so it'll never go below that. If there was some future where we had 500 less students, we may have the same dollar amount we have now, but they never cut your Chapter 70 aid.
Okay.
Not always the case with UGT.
So can I just clarify that? I know your answer was it's a one-time thing. I think the fact that it went up by $1 million is likely not to happen again, but at least I feel that that is going to be the number going forward. So-
Correct, it's going to be the number going
So
forward. It's not a one-time.
It will affect how much we need on the override, because we can relatively rely on that money going forward. So it's not like it's a 1 million this year and next year they're taking it away. So that's why I've gone through the numbers and, based on the way we did the $7 million override number, if we still went for that same level of services, we'd only really need 5.9. Still a big number, 5.9. If we eliminated the extra $250,000 for highway construction and the extra $300,000 we have in
Snow and ice.
snow and ice, then it would be a $5.4 million override. And I know some people say, well, that doesn't give the general government anything, but remember, this budget does not use free cash. Last year we used $1.8 million. So it really would, this budget that we're proposing would be a true balanced budget, as opposed to last year we had a $1.8 million deficit that we filled with free cash. So even at a lower amount of 5.4 that, quote, the town is going to benefit. And if you look at the impact to the average household, I think that's obviously a really important number. So the state has a calculator that they put on. Anyone can go on and punch in any override number you'd like. It's a public site. But at 5.950 is a potential override number. The average single-family residence would be $389.34. And then if you had a $1 million home, it would be around $850. And there's a range. There's a table that you can generally gauge how much the impact would be on your particular home. If you flip ahead to near the end, I just have the same calculation for a $5.4 million override. And
Page 20.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Page 20. Instead of a 382, it would be $353.13. So, as an override. So, you know how people like to spin numbers, right? The 353, that's about an average of $30 a month on the average home. And then, of course, if your home is worth twice that, it's double that. If it's worth half that, it's half that.
Okay, thank you. Having said all that, Tom.
Just a question now, thank you, Mr. Chairman, just for Mr. McQuaid. You mentioned $1 million additional in circuit breaker. Was it $1 million, is that the circuit breaker estimate or an additional circuit breaker estimate?
They've already applied 1.8 million circuit breaker. So the sped number that appears on the budget now is net of 1.8, and now they're adding another 1 million.
Does that mean we're estimating we'll receive another million?
We actually, the school committee already has that in reserve that has built up over the last 4 or 5 years, so.
All right, so the actual circuit breaker award is likely to be 1.8, something, we're guessing.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more than that. And it is a guesstimate at this point in time, and it is. But that million is a combination of what we're expecting and carryover.
Guessing is 75% or 65%?
Depends on the year.
But what is the 1.8?
1.8 is after foundation, 4 times foundation was 72%.
Okay.
Last year.
So the $1 million that Mr. McQuaid referred to is money that's there now that could be applied. It's not like the circuit breaker award is going up to 2.8 million.
No,
Okay.
it's a combination of what's we've had a dip in out of district this year.
Okay.
So that will affect how much reimbursement we get next year, but it's a combination of carryover, what we expect to carry over from this year, what we expect.
So it's a reserve that could be applied.
Right.
Okay.
And thinking back to when someone asked the question about the state aid, is it recurring? This number would not be. So if they're applying $1 million, so right now the schools have a $3.2 million deficit. They pretty much empty out the reserves. They'll have a $2.2 million deficit, and then they'll have to make other cuts to get to zero. But when we get to next year, they're not going to have that extra to put in.
Right.
So next year you'll be starting with a, $3 million deficit.
Okay, Ann.
Couple of things. First of all, I'd like to hear from the school committee about how they feel if they spend down completely this reserve that they have for SPED. And the other thing is that I would like to suggest that in the memorandum of understanding that the school committee would be allowed, they can do it now, that in the memorandum of understanding that the school committee keep $300,000 in that account for use when a child moves into the district. And each child that moves into the district usually costs us, what, $75,000 to $100,000? If they have severe needs. So I'd like to see a little bit of money in that pot. I don't want it to go up to $1 million. So I think maybe in the memorandum of understanding, if you folks can figure out a way to handle that. I think it's a good practice so that you're not coming back in the fall looking for money at town meeting when we may or may not have it. So, that's just my suggestion for your memorandum of understanding.
In the long term, the school committee plan, the long-term plan, if the override does pass, their plan is to use $300,000 a year of that $1 million excess, and hopefully it'll build up a little bit. So they'll be able to do $300,000 a year for 5 years, so that it kind of smooths out some of the activities.
Okay.
All right, further questions? Having said that, based on the material that we've heard, is anyone looking to make a motion to change the amount that's been proposed for the override?
Do we want to first vote on the second pass? By the way, do we do that?
We could do that.
Do you want to vote on the second pass?
Do we have a motion to, on the second pass?
I haven't read it.
Okay.
All right.
I don't want to vote on something that I
Okay.
just been handed.
All right, okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, so I'd like to make a motion on the override amount. So the last time when you called for a vote, it didn't kind of go the way I thought it was going to be. I kind of thought maybe what would happen was, do we have a consensus on at least this level of activity? But it kind of jumped right to a number that was too high for me as a CFO to fathom that $7 million. So I voted no on that. But had the vote gone the other way and started at a lower number, that, you know, I think you may have gotten a more unanimous vote. Maybe not unanimous, but closer anyways, at least by one vote. So my proposal is that the committee vote to at least, on this first vote, at least vote for an override amount of $5.4 million, which would solve many of the problems that we have on the long-term financial. And that if you voted yes, that does not mean in a subsequent vote that someone could not propose a higher amount, because there's obviously, at least on the table, 5950 as a second option that I've put forward, which takes into account the 1.1. So my motion would be that the board support at least a minimum of $5.4 million override.
Motion made, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? Maya?
Mr. McQuaid, can you clarify again what would be included in the, your number is 5.4 flat or 5.45?
5.4.
5.4. Can you clarify what would be covered in that?
Well, essentially, it would allow us to not use any free cash to balance the budget. And then secondarily, it would give the schools the $3.2 million that they're asking for, you know, to not have to cut this $3 million too. Plus, it would restore the programs that were lost before, which are about $1.8 million. Well, 1.5 net of the 300,000, but basically 1.8 of programs. So it basically would give the schools what they want. What it would not give extra is the proposal that was included in the $7 million, which was to give $250,000 more for highway construction and $300,000 for snow and ice. So that's the difference between basically the 5.4 and the 5.9.
Just to point out, the 0.4 is the number that would help us balance over the 5-year period. So in addition to closing the $3.2 million gap and adding the $1.8 million in lost programming, the 5.4 number also reasonably balances us for the next 5 years. We would need to either keep it at levy capacity or do an override stabilization fund.
And then if someone wanted to later increase that and say, we really need the highway money and we really need the snow and ice to get up to more historical levels, then obviously someone could propose a higher number than 5.4.
All right. Maya?
I'm sorry, can I ask one more question?
No.
The $7 million that we were talking about included $600,000 for general government. I understand that that deficit here has hopefully been resolved by the additional state money, but were there additional, I believe that you had talked about cuts beyond the $600,000. So what is left that what kind of cuts would you need to make in order to make 5.4 million work?
Because our budget's a little bit more capital intensive, out of the original 1.7 million we cut, some of that, it's tough to decide whether you want to call it a cut or not. Some of them were just readjusting a budget line to a more historic number. We did reduce road money. We did reduce a couple of other areas. With our increase in state aid, because the general government budget, if you remember, the school budget as an entity in and of itself is about $42 million. It's much more heavy on the labor side, and the average wage rate is higher, and the average growth in that wage rate is higher. So we can live with smaller chunks of money. So other than road money, and there'd be a few other things we're cutting, but with that 5.4, we'll roughly be balanced, and we should be able to balance over the next 5 years. Because we have, in some ways, more flexibility in our budget because it's less labor intensive, a balanced budget for general government for the next 5 years is we can keep level services with that because our budget is less labor intensive than the school budget. And that's common across any town in the Commonwealth. Norwood's not unique in that model.
All right, Laura.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. On the override options sheet that we were given at our last meeting, I just want to make sure I'm thinking about this correctly. The number was 5.9 million to close FY20 deficit, restore 1.7 million in school programming, and reasonably balanced budget through FY24. This uses zero free cash to balance the budget. So the idea, how are we getting from 5.9 to do all of that down to 5.4 is the bottom? Is that because of the increased state funding that we're counting on? I'm just unclear.
We go from 7 to 5.9 with the 1.1 state funding, and then the other reduction is not putting extra money into roads and snow and ice.
Right, but off of this sheet, the bottom number was 7.9, but the top option said that 5.9 was what we needed to close the FY20 deficit, restore 1.7 in school funding, and reasonably balanced budgets through FY24. So if that was the number that it took then, how are we getting to 5.4?
Combining these two.
That's what we're doing?
And
Okay.
then subtracting.
And we're taking out additional road money, 450, we had put in 250,000, so that comes out. We don't have a sheet breaking down what's in the 5.4, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand it.
So to sort of clarify where we are.
Yeah, thank you.
What Tom's saying is that for 5.9 million, we can get what 7 million got us a couple of weeks ago because there's been a change in the state aid process. His recommendation is to lower that further to 5.4 million, which would reduce the amount of money we put in for roads and for snow and ice. So 5.9 is the new 7, is one way to think of it.
And 5.4 is the new 5.9.
Correct. But again, it's because there's been a change in the increase, state aid increase. This could have very well gone the other way. Not that state aid tends to go down, but if health insurance, the GIC aggregate rate was 3.3, if it had been 9%, we'd be looking in the other direction.
Right, and so just so I'm clear then, the $250,000 in road money is out in the 5.4, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the $250,000 for snow and ice is out in the 5.4 number?
Yes.
Correct, okay.
Okay. And
Excuse me, Mr. Mizuko has said that your labor costs are considerably less than the schools. Yes, I understand that. But could you tell me what percentage of our budget the labor costs are for general government? Because I thought it was a fairly high percentage.
It is, but in general, depending on the department, it's really varied by the department. So if you want to take the town manager's office, probably 95% of my office budget is salaries. But the DPW, if you factor in salt and equipment and maintenance, their budget is much more on the equipment side than it is on the labor side. And remember, we've had this discussion before, if you think about a school is teachers, right? It's the body in the classroom. We can talk about supplies, but no matter, supplies are never a bigger portion of that budget. So the DPW, could be as low as 60%. If it's an administrative office, it's going to be a little bit of a higher amount. So that analogy is just to say that to remember that the labor is the driver in any budget. And if you take the school department as a budget and you take general government as a budget, not only is the school department larger by number of employees, about 450 compared to 300, the average wage rate is a little bit higher and the growth in that wage rate is higher and the percentage of their budget is much higher than the average general government budget. But that's just why general government is able to live on a smaller piece of the pie.
Again, what percentage? Because I had heard percentages in these meetings as high as 75%.
So that's probably accurate for most departments, but again, it does vary by department. But on the average,
I understand. But in general, in the general government, in our budget, the percentage for our human resources, what is 75%?
75%.
sure.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Unless you give us more road number, then that number goes down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So I'm just pointing out, it's a variable number over time.
Yeah. Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I object to this motion. I think it's out of order. Last meeting, we had a vote, and a motion and a position on this committee was prevailed with a 6-3 vote. Any change in that vote should be a motion to reconsider by a member who voted in the prevailing side. To that, I would be willing to make a motion to change the number to 5950, 5,950,000. That's basically the vote we took. We're taking into consideration the change in the state aid. Typically, you would do something like a reconsideration when there's been new substantial information that would change the matter. The discussion or debate about what we put in there, I don't see that anything's changed in that basic fundamental discussion that we've already resolved. So if this motion is continued to be accepted by the chair, I vote against it. I think it's out of order. I would make a new motion for the 5 million. I also want to just say a little philosophically that over a year ago, or about a year ago, when we hired the new town manager, the Board of Selectmen, or at least myself in particular, I'll speak for myself, not the board, thought that we had a structural deficit, a serious problem that we had to address, and a goal to try to increase our bond rating. And we wanted to look at that. We knew it would not be a one-year solution, and we've spent the whole year working towards that, getting through the last budget and starting this process and looking at where we're going. We've made a 5-year projection. We know we have a serious problem going forward if we don't take positive action. I think if we not cut out this other approximately $550,000 that's being suggested by Mr. McQuaid's motion, we're putting ourselves too far behind. We have a structural deficit we need to address, and I just don't think it's proper to good planning to get our bond rating up and to shore up our reserves and eliminate that structural deficit to go any further than this $5,950,000. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Well, let's back up for a second. Understand the argument. My suggestion would be if somebody would like to put a motion for reconsideration forward for that 5.4, that would be fine. Then we can vote on the other two things separately. As Mr. McQuaid has suggested, I think that's a good compromise, and that would be my suggestion. Would anybody like to make a motion for reconsideration?
Speak on that.
We need a motion.
I'd make a motion, if you'd entertain, Mr. Chairman, to reconsider our action at the last meeting to recommend an override of $7 million based on the information received from the state of increased state aid this year in the governor's House 1 bill recommendation, and that the committee would support a new number of $5,950,000.
We have a motion made and seconded. Discussion.
Wait, are we just voting on reconsidering, or are we voting on the 5.95?
First, let's vote on reconsideration.
That's fine. That's more proper.
Okay.
And then you have the debate
Fine.
over the new number. Yes.
All
that's
right,
correct.
fine.
Speak to that.
Yeah.
Although I haven't really changed my mind on what, I made the original motion for $7 million, and I haven't changed my mind about that specifically, but I do think it's important. I am in favor of reconsidering, because I don't want the perception to be that the Budget Balancing Committee got stuck in a parliamentary quandary, and that's what made the decision. I want to have a real debate and have everybody have a say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so we're voting on the motion for reconsideration. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. Do we have a motion? Bill?
Make a motion that we change, as I just said, change the number at our last meeting of $7 million, recommended for an override to $5,950,000 based on the new information, state aid, in the governor's House 1 bill.
Okay. Motion made. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded.
On the motion?
On the motion, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the 5.9 is equivalent to 7.0, I still think, are we keeping the snow and ice and road money in now?
Yes.
Under the 5.9, okay. All right, I think it's, I don't think we need additional snow and ice money in this, so I would vote no on it and prefer a lower number. But just want to make sure. So it does include that snow and ice and road money?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Bill?
Thank you. I'm not focused on, personally, on the selectmen have to yet decide the budget and where the numbers are going to go, but I think the 550,000 represented by those two in our discussion needs to stay in the budget for facing the deficit and long-term shoring up of our budget and trying to improve the bond rating, as I said. So the amount of money is more important than identifying it as roads and snow removal. Thank you.
Well, I mean, does the motion have that amount of money associated, solely with snow and ice removal, or solely, and road money, or is it just $550,000 to be used for some purpose?
For some purpose.
Okay.
If you like to keep it simple, you can leave, for my personal purposes, you can leave it, if that's how you want to identify it. The selectmen will then set the budgets and set the referendum as they see fit.
Okay, further discussion. Maura?
So just a couple of things that I want to be clear about. I am nervous about a number. I understand adjusting the number because of the increase in state aid. I am nervous that that won't come through. I have sat around and watched meetings and been involved in meetings where we thought we were going to get a certain amount of money from the state, and that has not come through. I agree with Maya. I voted for this because I want to be clear that the number that we're going to vote on and put forward should be a number that is argued about, and it shouldn't be because of a parliamentary procedure, but I am nervous about a number that is this low. And I think that we have to be very clear that if this passes, which is a massive if, we better make sure we have enough to make ourselves totally solvent, because we cannot come back and ask for more. And the other thing I would say, just in terms of speaking to the snow and ice, why I am in favor of keeping money slotted in there for it, is as a town meeting member, if you're gonna raise my taxes, and then I'm gonna sit there and say that we don't have the money to have snow and ice within the budget, and we have to pay for that out of free cash, I am not gonna be happy. If we're increasing the amount we're paying, I think we need to make sure that we're covering ourselves.
Okay. Ann?
On the snow and ice. Every year we have to pay into the snow and ice. And it has bothered me forever that snow and ice is not fully funded. And I don't know how we can have a legitimate budget, and everybody always says you have to have a balanced budget, if we don't put in the correct amount of money for snow and ice. The money now I have been told that the money for the roads that is also added into this won't be enough, and therefore, you're setting expectations that we're gonna have beautiful roads if we add in this money. Well, if we add in this money and we kind of save it a little bit here and there and do larger chunks of the road, then maybe things will be getting better a little sooner rather than way down the line. And our roads, people have to understand, our roads are in bad condition now, and it's going to take us a long while to get our roads back in shape. So the sooner we start, the better off we're going to be. And again, we know what the budget should be, and we're not budgeting it correctly. And I would like to see us budget things correctly. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. All right, just a couple of things, Mr. Chairman. First of all, snow and ice. The difficult thing about budgeting for snow and ice is that each year is a discrete event, and it can go up, it can go down. 2015, for example, fiscal 2015, we budgeted, I think, $475,000. We spent $2.2 million. In cases such as that, the state will allow you to spread the the liability or the obligation over several years. In that case, they allowed us 3 years to pay the 2.2 because we were so badly underfunded, like every other town. We actually got it done in 2 years. But so it's we talk about wanting to adequately budget for snow and ice. All you could really do is kind of work on a sort of a 5 or 10 year average and include some sort of an accelerator. But I'll tell you what, then I say in the spirit of goodwill here, Mr. Mizuko wants his $250,000 for snow and ice, and we'll do it for roads as well, I guess. Then, is that what you want? It's fine. All right.
Okay. Further discussion?
Mr. Plasko would kill me.
Hearing none. All in favor of 5.95 million? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. It's very good. It's excellent that we got a unanimous vote. I think that's very significant. And again, I'd like to see that noted in the minutes. That it was a unanimous vote, and that's particularly significant for such a difficult question. Thank you. All right. With that, next item will be the status of the Memorandum of Understanding. Do we have any updates on the Memorandum of Understanding?
I can start, thank you. We did meet before the last meeting and did do a revised draft. And part of that, I don't know if is it in this packet?
We include the updated copy in the packet.
Is your mic on?
Yeah.
Yeah, be really close to my mic.
That's really close to the
We
mic.
didn't
Got
see
it. So we did update the MOU. Unfortunately, we're not sharing it with you today, but we did update that. I'll be quite honest at this point. In order to really do an MOU, we need to have a number voted on and a date voted on, so we can keep talking about the MOU and going around. But in order to get to the point where I can actually plan and move forward and talk to the committee about committing themselves to it, we probably need a couple other things to happen first.
If the committee has any recommendations or suggestions, we'd be more than happy to take them. It's not something where there's a lot of models out there. Arlington has one, there's another town here or there that's done something, and they're all based on how those individual towns tend to do their unique, manage their unique budgeting system. So Dave and I sat down a few times, we've gone over it, we've updated. I think we mailed it out to the committee. If not, we can email it out to everyone tomorrow. But there's no common model out there, so if anyone has suggestions, they're all just fairly generic. Even Arlington's is just a couple of lines spread throughout their budget process. So it's not a typical document that we could just take and say, well, recreate it for Norwood. There's no model out there, so we throw a few things out there, but the committee would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. No, just that I think that, before we go out for a vote, whenever that is, we have to have a completed MOU, because that's, again, I can't emphasize how critical that is to demonstrate to the voters that if you give us this for 5 years, we're not coming back.
I would agree, but suggestions on what you feel should be in there would be appropriate.
Good. Okay, thank you. Maura?
Sure. Just a point of clarity off of what you just said, Mr. Chair. Is the idea that the MOU must be completed before the vote or before it goes forward to the selectmen to vote to put it on a ballot and for a date for the override? I was just unclear.
My thought that before it goes to the voters is a ballot question.
Okay, great, thank you. And just one point on the MOU, you would ask for suggestions. I understand that this is a little bit of a touchy subject, but in my opinion, and this is sort of backed up by some of the conversations that we've had at the school committee, I wonder if there's a way, I fully understand the need to keep shared costs down, and that obviously is impacted by benefited positions. I would just wonder if there is any way, and I've brought this up before, to look at the language there, so it's not limiting the number of benefited positions, but limiting the percentage increase in shared costs. That would be a recommendation that I would have if we could look at that in terms of the language.
I do know there's some language in there on the that we adopted from Arlington about the cost of health insurance, and what we've crafted into sort of some sort of limit or position control on FTEs. There's an exemption we put in there for mandated positions, understanding that those mandated positions shouldn't count against your cap. And then Dr. Thompson and I had also spoken, if we move forward with the shared facilities department, that'll ultimately change the numbers. So it may just be on any given year, don't increase more than X, unless it's a position that you can tie to a specific mandate or a specific need. That way, if you did, you could have 7 kids move into the district and all 7 of them require an individual support staff member, and that shouldn't count towards a number there. But we're looking at that. We could look at a percentage cap on salaries, and if we say, oh, sorry, this year happens to be a big year, then you do have to reduce somewhere else. But again, it is challenging in that there's not a standard override MOU out there. There are a few towns that have done them. They're all, I don't want to say they're all over the place, but every town's budgeting system is a little unique.
Okay. Further discussion on the MOU? Hearing none. Okay, override recommendations are taken care of. The next agenda item, just a discussion of override date, with the understanding that this committee really has no say in when the override date would occur. That's solely the responsibility of the selectmen. But I know people would like to discuss that, so, Tony.
Just, the superintendent and I both recommend a June date. I know there's concern about whether it runs into the 15th or not, but Common in Communities is a post-town meeting date, so that'll be my recommendation to the selectmen. I'm sure it's Dr. Thompson's recommendation, so just from our perspective, we recommend a June vote.
Chairman? I believe the Board of Selectmen is in receipt of a letter from the school committee asking for an April date.
I'd like to clarify that a little bit. We did express we discussed some of the pros and cons, and we do think that there's some benefits to an April date, but what we really were worried about was a late June, early July date, when there had been discussion of 35 days after town meeting closes. That would put us after June 15th, which means that we would have to provide layoff notices to our teachers if the override vote didn't happen before July 1st, then teachers would actually start, who had received layoff notices, would actually start collecting unemployment until they were formally rehired, even if the override passed. So I personally would like to look at options that would allow us to do an early June vote.
Okay, so that's fine, Mr. Chairman, thank you. If you have a sort of a drop dead date, then just somewhere like before, say, the 14th or something, is that what we're thinking?
10th?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
June 10th?
Okay.
I mean, from the selectmen's perspective, if you wanted to put something on the April 1 ballot, when would you have to do that? When would you have to make the decision?
I believe the date is February 22nd. It's 35 days, right?
Well, the 19th as far as posted meetings that we have, yeah.
February 19th.
Yes.
Well, our last meeting before then would be February 19th. We could meet, we could meet on a different date to do it, but we would want to do it with a full board, and we're not going to have a full board on the 19th or the 12th. So it would be the 5th. It would be the 5th. If we want the April date. If we don't, then the 35-day window stretches out another roughly 60 days, and we have more time.
Okay, Mara.
Dueling mics.
Yeah.
So, something just to keep in mind is I think, I understand that it's 35 days from the vote and things like that, but I do think there is a little bit of a sense to kind of, no matter which date it is, and I think that there are pros and cons to each, and I personally want to speak just a little bit before I make my second point about the pros and cons that I see. In terms of the April date, I think we're getting up against it where we can start, getting information out there and having all of the information that I think the public is going to need to make this important decision in terms of all that. I think we're getting a little late for that, and my concern is that we may have passed that window. That being said, I think a vote in June, I think an early June vote would be an absolute necessity as far as the schools are concerned, but I think we should just be clear that is going to be a lot of pain for a lot of people. That is going to be cuts that are going to go out there. That is going to be, layoffs that are going to be out there that if we had an April vote, maybe we wouldn't need to do. And I also think that in terms of a $2.2 million of cuts that the school committee is going to have to identify and that town meeting is going to have to vote on, there's going to be real uncertainty depending on when that vote is in June, that you may have students leaving a school, never knowing if they're coming back to that school, because we might have to change around what schools we're having. I just think that that was sort of the crux, I think, of the school committee's letter, was just to kind of keep in mind that depending on when we do this, there are real long-lasting ramifications that we have to be looking at, and just to be sort of mindful of those, that I suspect that the June vote makes more sense in terms of a ability to get the information that is needed out there. I have cautions about it because of the sort of pain that a lot of people are going to go through sort of in the interim. And to that point, I would just say that I think that the sooner we can kind of get a little bit of it settled as to the number and, you know, the date, I think that will go a long way to sort of getting things off the ground and moving forward, as opposed to feeling like we're kind of hurrying up and waiting and, you know, sort of keeping that anxiety out there.
Mr. Chairman, just one thing.
Sure.
Just in response, and Dr. Thompson too, I think that town meeting this year is scheduled to start on May 14, I believe, which is the latest possible date. So if we have our usual 5 nights, it'll take us right up and maybe even beyond Memorial Day, 14, 17, 21, 24, maybe not.
The Thursday after Memorial Day, probably.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that I'm just mentioning this because somebody in this audience who's here in the room now actually brought it up one point. You actually could, I suppose, hold the special town meeting prior to May 14th and get the special out of the way, give it 2 nights, get it, and so that on May 14th you go straight to the annual, which usually takes us 2 nights, right? 2 to 3 nights.
2 to 3 nights.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, Dr.
If I
Thompson.
could just speak a little bit to this. Schools are a little different in that we have a hard start and a hard end. So June 30, we are in a, you know, when you talk about other companies and other organizations, they can have a launch date and they can set a launch date that works for them. Our launch date is September. It does not change. We have to be ready to roll. If we are reducing staff, that is a tremendously laborious process. We would need to start that before the vote even happens. Okay, we would probably need to give people slips before the vote happens in early June. I just want to be upfront with people. If we are going to have to close a building, which is entirely a possibility, we're going to have to start planning a move. Packing will need to start happening in June, unless there's going to be some more money to hire people to come back and do that. So we're in the position where we're looking at least, you know, $1.5 million or $2 million worth of hard cuts that will need a lot of planning and implementation. Anything later, we would not be able to recover from that. So, you know, and I'm not going to pretend to be the expert in how towns work and town government and that sort of thing. I'll leave that to you folks. But there's got to be a way where you can have a ballot question with a number, and if town meeting approves a number less than that, if it doesn't go over, there's got to be some way of doing that or moving that, you know, that process up or something, because we have a hard stop and a hard end, and anything beyond that early June date, pretty much we're all going to be paying for it, because we would not be in a position where we're even calling people back and trying to find people until the middle of the summer, and you will have people collecting unemployment because they won't know if they're getting called back or not. And I just want to be upfront with that.
Okay. Well, right now, the selectmen have a letter from the school committee essentially saying that, you know, an April 1 date, you know, would be preferable. They're going to have to vote, you know, in a week and a half, whether they want to do something in April or not. If you have any further clarification to that, could you send it to the selectmen?
I drafted the letter, and I didn't think that it said that we were asking for an April 1st. I think that the intent of the letter was to just point out the difficulties that arise with a late vote, especially a vote 35 days after town meeting.
Okay. All right, thank you. Ann?
after being in Budget Balancing Subcommittee with the school department and recognizing the cuts that will need to be made, I sincerely believe that April 1st, and I know there is problems with April 1st, but I sincerely believe that April 1st is the better date. And the reason for that is that you have a school system that is not strong, hasn't got a strong administration, and I don't mean that about the people that are working there, they work very hard. But I mean that there are things that need to be done, as Dr. Thompson said, that there aren't any bodies to do this work at this point. You have teachers and you have some custodial staff and you have some administrators. But to do what is going to need to be done, it's going to take an enormous effort. So I think that needs to be one of the biggest considerations. The teachers, the notices for the teachers, that's going to cost us money. And here we are trying to balance budgets, and yet we're spending money when we don't necessarily need to. Now, my sympathies are with people who want to promote an override, and I understand that you want to promote this override. You've known, I'm going to step on some toes here. You've known that there is a probability that we would ask for an override for several months. So my hope would have been that you would have been organizing things. Maybe you can't collect money, maybe you can't be an organization as the state defines it. But I would have thought that there was some work going on that would make it easy for you to slip into what is coming up. And I apologize for being fairly blunt about this, but I do see that there are significant problems for the school department if we don't do this early. The other issue is we're going to need to have all our votes, as we always do, blessed by the state as town meeting, and what we vote on has to be blessed. So then we have an election, and the election has to be correct and understood by who checks on our election status, the votes and that sort of thing. How long does it take?
One night.
8 o'clock at night.
Pardon me?
8 o'clock.
Election night.
We get it election night, but does that include all of our people who aren't present, or who do absentee ballots and all that sort of stuff? Those are all corrected and done on that night. Okay. And then does it go to the state for ratification? Yes. And how long does that take? That's what I'm looking for.
What's the purpose?
The purpose is that we can't move forward on this until we have ratification of our election. Correct?
The vote will tell you what's the result.
Okay. I made my point.
All right, further discussion on the override date. Hearing none, let's go to next item, which is other business.
Excuse me.
Oh,
Me.
yeah, sure.
Can I make a motion on the override date?
Sure.
I'd like to make a motion for April 1st as an override date.
Motion made, do we have a second? Mara. Motion made and seconded. Tom?
Just, we're voting on is what to recommend?
It's a recommendation, it's the
Yeah.
selectmen's call.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You know, since this is a vote that the selectmen have to take separately, if we do take a vote on this motion, if the selectmen would feel more comfortable abstaining on this motion, I would certainly understand. Bill?
I'm going to vote against it, Mr. Chairman. I don't think it's, for myself, it is a recommendation from this body because the selectmen still have to deal with it individually
Right.
themselves. And everything we've proposed is a recommendation going forward. But I think don't seem to be set enough ourselves and we still have time to think about it. And where
Okay.
there is another body that has to make the final decision, that being the Board of Selectmen, I'm not ready to even make a recommendation this evening.
Okay.
Give more time to, there's been so many viewpoints made to me from so many individuals of what the right date may be, that I'm not ready to vote tonight on that. I would vote
Okay.
later on, in my case as a selectman, but I just don't think this body is set to do that tonight.
Okay. Dave?
If I could follow up, and, you know, as much as I would love to have an answer in April and save a whole lot of pain going forward, I'll be honest, my first priority is to have an override pass, because to not have an override pass would be devastating to the school system. So, you know, going through a little bit of pain, hopefully give a chance of educating the public and the voters so they can make an informed choice. With that being said, I would strongly urge the selectmen not to wait on setting a date, because the sooner we set a date, the sooner we can plan for when we're going to know, and people can start organizing around that date. But that's all I'll say on that.
Okay, thank you. Mara?
I wonder if it would be more acceptable, and this is more just a question to feel out the sort of mood of the committee, to put forward a recommendation to schedule an override vote no later than June 10th. I wonder if that might, you know, to kind of keep in mind the June 15th deadline in terms of teachers and things like that, and then we put it to the selectmen, which obviously it's going to be anyways, but I wonder if that might be a recommendation that's more palatable to the board.
On the motion or on the...
Just a question.
Well, that's a question.
Yeah, so June 10th is a Monday. We have our town elections on Mondays,
Yep, so
as it turns
11th.
out. So Monday is not so unusual to us. As it
So
is.
I wasn't looking at a calendar, so
No,
11th is fine.
it would be, it's probably going to have to be that week,
Yeah.
by the sounds of it. So if well, the 10th is a Monday, 11th is a Tuesday. If the 10th is a good, you know, is a deadline you want us to observe, then we'll count it as the 10th.
You could call this any day, it doesn't have to be Monday.
On the date of the 10th, excuse me, on a date of the 10th, would everyone, you know, the town, you know, general government, the schools, et cetera, you know, election law, which I don't agree, I admit I fully don't understand, would there be enough time, you know, with town meeting and everything to be able to have a date of June 10th? I mean, does people feel comfortable that that would be the outside date?
Well, yeah, the outside date, just to say
Yeah.
no later than, yeah.
All right, so people feel comfortable that given our election responsibilities and laws and all that other good stuff, that that date is not unreasonable,
Yep.
given the fact we want to go to town meeting first.
I have a compromise. How about, why wouldn't we want to do it before town meeting? Give everybody an extra month, May 1st. Do it May 1st.
Well, I mean, right now, we have a number of different dates and a number of motions on the floor. Why don't we first vote on the motion for April 1? And again, people have to understand, we're an advisory committee only. I mean, there aren't people, not the, you know, lose sight of that. On the motion, on the motion for April 1, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
All right. 8 opposed, 1 in favor. Do we have a subsequent motion?
Mr. Chair? I will make the motion to recommend to the selectmen that we recommend a date no later than June 10th.
Second? Anyone?
I'll second it.
Ann will second. Further discussion on a date no later than June 10th. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. If we decide to have, you know, as Ann suggested, you know, some kind of date between, you know, April 1 and June, we certainly have, the selectmen certainly have the opportunity to make that recommendation. Okay. Good, all right, under other business, two things. First, I submitted a report to the committee which summarized the recommendations that we had made at the last meeting. That was a $7 million override. That was also the basis of the report which we were giving to the selectmen, which will be for tomorrow night's meeting. Of course, right after I finished it, we then got the new cherry sheet from the governor. So numbers have changed positively, fortunately. So I will have to change some of the numbers of that report. But, those would be numbers consistent with what we discussed today. So what I would like from the committee, is if someone would be willing to make a motion that they would accept the recommendations of that report and allow me to present it to the selectmen tomorrow night
So moved.
with the changes.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, unanimous. For tomorrow night's meeting, would it be possible for us to have two slides? One showing the revised override number, another one showing the revised impact to taxpayers?
Sure.
Okay.
Just Mr. Chair, I would also recommend having a slide that breaks out what is in that recommendation and the amounts.
Yes, that would be part of that
Okay,
slide,
good.
absolutely. And I will have a revised report to the selectmen, a complete report by the end of the week. But I think it's particularly important that they see the revised override numbers. Okay. Next order of business will be next meeting. When do we looking to have another meeting?
Is the budget balancing subcommittee?
Budget?
Tom.
3 weeks,
Tom sent us,
4 weeks.
I can wait the last week of February.
Do we have,
Let's do the last week of February.
what are we
Time to
looking?
complete budgets and get information out.
So do you have a suggestion?
25th of February, I'm out of town, so that's a great date.
The 18th is President's Day, so I would
Can't-
recommend the 11th?
I mean, do we, I mean, is there really enough in 2 weeks for us to have another meeting?
Well, then we're in March.
You've done that already.
How about March 4th?
Do we want to have, March 4th? With the understanding that if something happens, we could always call another meeting, something critical enough to justify another meeting, we can do that. So do we want to talk about March 4th?
Maura and I each have conflicts on March 4th.
Oh, all right.
Sorry.
Okay, well, I mean, is there a different day other than Monday?
That whole week is out.
The week of March 4th?
Yes.
We could leave it to be determined and have somebody from the office send out a calendar invite with,
Okay,
doodle
we will-
with different times.
We will do that, yes.
So if the next meeting is not until March 4th, is it the intention that the school committee will come back with a balanced budget by that time? Because sometime soon there in March, we need to start putting together a budget book for town meeting. Just seems like a long time for that meeting.
Yep, okay.
The school committee does intend to make the majority of our cuts probably before February vacation, and we have an additional meeting scheduled after February vacation. We've scheduled 3 school committee meetings for the month of February so that we can work through this budget. But the difficult thing is, there's other pieces of the puzzle that are still in play, like the GIC numbers and things like that. So, will it be 100% balanced? No, but we would have significant cuts made by then.
Okay, Tom, from your perspective in putting the budget together and the budget books, what's the date that you absolutely have to have a budget for both sides?
Mr. Chairman, my suggestion would be if we're meeting March 4th, then we should meet 2 weeks after that as well, March 18th. And then
Yeah.
with the expectation that that would be the final number, that could go to the school committee another couple of weeks.
Yeah.
If they're not exactly down to 0.
Yeah, I think the March 4th date was out, that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, Tony's suggestion was that, there will be a calendar request, with potential dates given, and I think, why don't we leave it at that? Seem reasonable? Okay. All right. No, there's always, at this point, it would be too difficult to try to figure out calendars. So, Tony, we'll send a notice out with a Plan A and a Plan B, maybe even a Plan C, and we'll pick something then. With that, do we have any further business? Ann?
I just would like to speak a little bit to how we're running these meetings for, to update ourselves and the public about the first pass, second pass, and that sort of thing. And tonight was hopefully a little weird because we had to move out into this hall. But I would like to make sure that during these meetings, any meetings that are between the school committee and the general government are discussed openly, and people explain what has happened in the last 2 weeks to make changes within this budget. I would like to have us go over these papers that Tom handed out tonight over what our deficit is, where we are with that deficit, where we got the money, where we're losing money, which sometimes happens, unfortunately, and to make sure that each and every one of these things, as it had in the past been done. Now, the things that we've been doing for the last couple of months are very different because we were looking at a 5-year projection and that sort of thing. But this is very important for town meeting members, I think, to understand and to follow along how we're coming to these passes and what agreements are being made. So I want to make sure that in the format of our next few meetings, this is what we follow. And the past practices that have made sure that everybody understood what was going on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Normally at this time, I will ask for questions from the audience. I will do that today, but please, it is a little later than we normally are. If you have a comment, could we please try to keep it short?
If we go to that 595 override number instead and then don't get that funding, what would that look like?
So what the governor's done, there's two different things here. One is his proposals for how to change the education funding formula. And that's based on 2 or 3 years ago, the state convened what they call the Foundation Budget Review Committee. The foundation budget is how the state determines how much money we need to spend on education. And the problem is that in the early 90s, some of the assumptions used then are not the same assumptions today. They projected that health insurance would grow at 2% a year. Well, if health insurance had grown at 2% a year since 1993, we wouldn't have any of these challenges. So there's his recommendations on implementing them, but the numbers we've actually gotten are his budget for the year. So that's a much more solid number. Now, that might get funded and nothing else may change from that, but the governor's budget historically has never been reduced for state aid by the legislature. So is that possible that it could happen? Sure, it could have happened last year, it could have happened the year before, but the legislature's historically never done that. They don't like to look like the bad guy, and the way the politics play out on Beacon Hill is the governor tries to look good, and the legislature always wants to sort of pop one up and then look a little bit better. What the state's doing right now is playing a game with the fact that the Commonwealth needs to raise taxes to fund some of these things, but nobody wants to come out and say that at the state level. So in theory, if that number went back down, sure, that would be a $500,000 or $1 million revenue shortfall. That never really happens. Not saying it couldn't happen, but the legislature would have to come in and say, well, we disagree with the governor's number, let's adjust the formula. Where they're going to be stuck is every formula has winners and losers, so there's no way they can really adjust the formula in a way that would then make Norwood be hurt, and certain communities would work out a little bit better, because there are some communities around the state that are wealthy that are upset by the formula. There are some that it doesn't impact. There are some poor communities in the state. Boston didn't do too well, but Boston is a high-needs population with a wealthy tax base. But cities in the western part of the state, Pittsfield, Mass, for instance, they're about 50% larger than us by both student population and population of the community. they're getting $3.5 or $4 million more in state aid. So the state really can't adjust that formula without all of a sudden taking a whole bunch of communities that think they're set and not doing it. So it's always not really upsetting the apple cart. It's always a risk, but the governor's budget has always been what we call the floor, and it always goes up from there. The formula itself, I can't see the state stepping in and saying, well, let's tweak it a little bit, because who are they going to benefit? It will be different legislators trying to say, well, tweak it this way or tweak it that way. And again, this first year of its formula changes is beneficial to us. Future years, not that it would hurt us, but we just may not see much of a big increase. So, but that is separate from his proposal over the next 6 years to fully implement it and actually change the law as to how we fund it. So that's why I certainly feel comfortable with the number that's in there, because the governor's budget that he actually submits has always been the floor for state aid.
Good.
Can I follow up? You know, the other piece, it is a 7-year plan, and this commission report is in its 3rd year, and they looked the last 2 years to fund it, and the problem has been where the money was coming from, and I still don't know where the money's coming from for this. He's talking adding $400 million into the budget. I don't know whether that's, you know, where exactly that money's coming from. But, you know, on several, you know, conference call on Friday, there was a lot of complaining about, you know, the numbers associated with that number. So for instance, ELL, you get, you know, 3,000 per child more than, well, maybe it should be 250. So we'll see if that actually happens, but it's a 7-year plan. But the other piece that people are not talking about is that there are things in the proposed law to change and requirements that, again, mandates that we will have to meet, not mandates that we should meet around social emotional learning and mental health, which we have been arguing for the last year and a half and not really fully been able to fund. So some of that money will be need to be used towards that, which is not in the original proposal.
All right, thank you. Katie?
I just have a question with regards to the school deficit for clarity to the public. Originally, we had been told that the deficit was a $3.1 million deficit, and that we've gotten to that number by applying the $1 million circuit breaker from last year. So it had come from 4.1 down to 3.1. That's what Mr. McQuaid was saying at the beginning, was that it had gone from 3.1 by the $1 million circuit breaker and taken it down to 2.1. It's still at 3.1, right?
Let me just clarify that. So as we attempt to balance the budget, things change on both sides. The school budget changes, and then our target budget changes. And so what happened is we originally had a $4.1 million difference between the two. The school committee voted unanimously to add in more circuit breaker money, which would reduce our ask by $1 million. What Mr. McQuaid was referring to tonight is that with the additional state aid money and the state charges that came in less than we thought, that has reduced our target. So our current deficit, the difference, is $2,216,499. If we use that $1 million of circuit breaker that we've already voted to use, yes. And as people have pointed out, we voted to use that knowing that that's not a sustainable plan going forward, that was a one-time deal, but we wanted to minimize the impact of potentially there being no override for this first year.
It buys us time in the first year. It puts us in a bad situation going forward.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie so I have a follow-up question for you, Dr. Thompson. You just mentioned that the state aid we're receiving $1.1 million. That comes with a stipulation that we spend a certain portion of that on a special group of people. Is that what those funds were originally planned for in our original $3.1 million?
That piece of the law doesn't come in until 2021. So it will not impact this budget cycle, but it is something we're going to need to consider for the next budget cycle. You're welcome.
Hi. And this name?
Julie.
Yep.
How much, so we've come to this number of 5.9 based on, some of this great potential, money away from the state, and you guys have got this $1 million. This 5.9,
As far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, none of that is one-time money.
Yeah, the 1 million in circuit breaker is to balance the 20 budget with no override. It's not the override budget. The plan for that is to put an extra 300,000 in going forward, not the whole kit and caboodle.
If you get the override, you will not use the $1 million.
Not all of it, we'll use 300,000.
The intent of assuming an override passes is to use $300,000 of circuit breaker money for a period of 5 years. And again, this override, assuming the override passes, it also assumes we will not be using any free cash at all into the base budget. That'll be used for other purposes.
So we won't in 3 years be in a situation where we thought 5.9 balances the budget was based on some one-time money, and 3 years down the road it doesn't happen.
Correct. I mean, what's critical also is the memorandum of understanding. Also, the 5-year plan that we have with the numbers given to us both by the general government side and the school side clearly show that, you know, they use certain percentages that they both will be able to meet their needs, with the amount that would be voted for this override.
Mr. Chair?
Just 2 points to that. One of them being, everything's still based on a projection. So we're using the term reasonably balanced over the next 5 years. The thing that we can't predict is the economy. So the economy could go up, the economy could go down. I mean, we have projections in there for new growth numbers, for instance, and that's new additions to the tax base. That number's programmed in at, I think, $900,000. If the economy goes down, that number could be $400,000 a year, and we could have a trouble in 2 or 3 years. That number could also be $1.3 million, and we're good for many years beyond that. The town, Tom and I, we did bring in a consultant actually just this morning, a retired finance director from Lexington, to sort of look over some of our assumptions in the budget. And again, any number in the budget when you're projecting out over a 5-year period, you could always debate, well, do you use 6% for salaries, do you use 4% for salaries? But we wanted somebody else who's been through this. They've done multiple overrides in Lexington. He's a retired finance director, Rob Adelson. And he said he felt our numbers were in line with where they should be. I mean, again, you could argue every way, should this go up a little bit, should this go down a little bit? But nothing struck him as odd. So based on the next 5 years, again, we think that that's a reasonable projection. We think we'll be good, but the economy always does have an impact. This year's state aid increase is something that you wouldn't reasonably predict. Maybe in 2 years we get another $1 million increase in state aid. I do know right around FY probably 21 or 22, some of the state aid numbers will reset with the next census. So that's going to have an impact. It could be positive or negative, but there's no way to project what that's going to be. But our cost estimates and our revenue estimates are based on what we reasonably project them to be over the next 5 years. But the economy always does have some sort of an impact on that.
Just stealing the mic from you. Just a couple things. This whole process is built on a model of a town we're not supposed to mention, Mr. Loney, we're not supposed to mention what town it is, but...
Do it at your peril, doctor. Do it at your peril.
But it's built as a 5-year plan, which in other towns that it was built off of has gone further than 5 years. So this is not a one-time thing. I think that's important for the taxpayer to know. And the other piece is that, I mean, this town has been well managed for a long period of time and not had to have this ask. And that really is quite a tribute to the planning and the foresight here. But we're getting to a point, from the school side, we're not investing in what we should be investing in to make sure we're investing in the future of this town and investing in the kids who are going to move into this community and be your taxpayers in 10 years or so. So if you want them ready for the next economy, we need to have things to do that. So with that, I'll put it back over to the chair.
Okay. All right. Teresa.
I know you said this earlier, but it's in the other room, and a lot of people here weren't able to get in, so I was wondering if Dr. Thompson and Monroe might, if you wouldn't mind just quickly repeating the data analysis that I know a lot of people are working on since Friday. And if you could just please share with the community, how has our ELL population increased since FY10? How has our population increased, and currently what is the percentage of students who are defined as high needs? Because I think it really illustrates a lot of what we're asking for as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a quick thing. I think I kind of rushed through it, but it was a good 10 minutes. But and then I gave my slides, my notes on it to somebody else on the way down. But basically, our special ed students increased by 15. This is from 2010, FY10 to October of this year, increased by 15%. Economically disadvantaged is now increased, where we're at 26% of our population is economically disadvantaged. We've seen an increase of 3.7 of those students with American with Disabilities 504 designation. So then, ELL has gone up 105%. And we'll actually put these slides up on the website. You know, the population has dropped about 52 kids in those 9+ years, but the amount of needs have gone up. And you know, we did increase in total, and this is different from this town reports because those fluctuate between who's in grants, who's in revolving funds. This is from the state. This is who we report to the state. We went up 36.04, but 23 of them were paraprofessionals. 23.8 of them, full-time equivalents, were paraprofessionals specifically targeted to meet children with needs who have moved into the district. So, you know, I think that's kind of the short Reader's Digest condensed version. There are a couple other examples of the slides, but we will put that up, and we will also put up the spreadsheet from this with the state, which is basically the state report that shows all that. 2012 was a strange year in that that's where we had the lowest number of FTEs because of the economy tanking and a high number of layoffs. So
Yep.
that's why we went back 2 more years to get it.
I will also note that that part of his presentation was recorded on TV. The reason we started off in the other room is because we have a whiteboard there. It would allow him to do that presentation. Since it's been recorded, you know, people have the opportunity to watch that, not only the slides, but his explanations of his detailed explanations of the particulars of the slide. So, with that, seeing no further questions, I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made, seconded. Further discussion, hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you very much.